What if I told you there's a very simple 2-mana commander that equalizes the stats of every creature on the board and makes combat completely unwinnable for your opponents? Kudo, King Among Bears. For just 2 mana in Selesnya colors, we get a 2/2 bear who looks like he's seen some things. And Kudo is about as simple a commander as you can get. But don't let his simplicity fool you, because his one line of text is incredibly impactful. All creatures will get a base power and toughness of 2, and they will be bears in addition to their other types. And that one simple ability completely rewrites how combat works. From the moment Kudo hits the battlefield, every creature will be equalized. Mana dorks, creature tokens, dragons, and even the biggest Eldrazi will be flattened into a 2/2 stat line. Thanks to Kudo, your cute little 0/1 plant token can now suddenly trade with a Kozilek in combat, which is honestly absurd. And this is exactly where this deck starts abusing the rules. Because once everything is locked in at that 2/2 base stat line, any stat boost at all is incredibly massive. A single Anthem effect, a single +1/+1 counter, or any small buff, that's all it takes to make sure that your creatures will always come out ahead in combat. Your opponents will be stuck with their tiny 2/2 bodies while we will be slowly growing our board far beyond that stat line. Over the course of the game, this will create a huge imbalance in power. And that imbalance is exactly what this deck is built to exploit. On top of that, Kudo will also turn every creature into a bear in addition to its other types. And that ability isn't just flavor text. It opens the door to some extremely powerful tribal synergies, because all of a sudden your entire board will share a creature type. Now Kudo isn't a new commander by any means, and a lot of people have already been building him. Most lists tend to go down one of 2 routes. Either a really heavy stacks list just stacking hate bear creatures and slowing down the game, or a +1/+1 counter based shell that relies on winning the game by using infinite combos. But I deliberately decided to avoid both. Instead, I built this as a €100 budget Selesnya token deck, focused on going wide and stacking a ton of Anthem effects. No tutors, no game changers, no combos, just some fair and honest magic. The goal of this deck is very simple. We want to flood the board with creatures, turn all of them into bears with Kudo, and then make sure our bears are always bigger than everyone else's. It's extremely straightforward, a huge amount of fun to pilot, and the perfect deck to whip out at the end of the night if you don't have the mental capacity to play a super complex combo deck anymore. And even though the game plan is very simple, don't underestimate how powerful this deck can be. Because once Kudo is online, combat will become completely miserable for your opponents. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 8 categories: the token generators, the Anthem effects and stat boosts, the acceleration, the card draw, the support, protection and interaction, the lands, and an upgrade section, where I will be showing you the cards you can use to upgrade this deck if you don't care about the €100 budget and you want to push this cute little bear to its absolute limit. Let's get started by talking about the backbone of this deck, the token generators. These are the cards that allow us to flood the board with creatures, giving us the numbers we need to fully abuse Kudo's ability. The more bodies we have in play, the more value we will get from all of our Anthem effects and stat boosts. Inox Strike Leader, one of the strongest 2-drop token-based creatures we got in recent years. Whenever you attack with either this creature or your commander, you get to generate a 1/1 tapped and attacking red goblin token for each opponent, which in itself is already some really solid value, because every time you attack with this, you will get to generate 3 1/1 tokens. And obviously, whenever you do have Kudo on the battlefield, these goblin tokens will be 2/2 creatures instead of 1/1s. So this creature will generate you a total of 6 power and 6 toughness entering the battlefield in the form of goblin tokens whenever you attack. And that ability in itself would already be enough to include this card in the deck, but it even has another activated ability. By sacrificing this creature, you can give all creature tokens you control indestructible until the end of turn. As you will see later in this video, the amount of creature tokens we'll be generating in this deck is absolutely insane. And the fact that you can just sacrifice this creature whenever an opponent is playing a board wipe to make all of your tokens survive is some incredible protection value. Emara, Soul of the Accord, a 2-drop body that whenever it gets tapped, it will generate you a 1/1 white soldier token with lifelink. Now the easiest way to trigger Emara is obviously just attacking with her, but in this deck we do play many more ways to actually tap her and generate us that token. Whenever you tap Emara to cast any of your convoke spells she will trigger, you can just tap her to station any of the spacecraft we play in this deck, and we also play a ton of effects like Cryptolitherite, which will allow you to tap Emara for mana. Whenever you do so, you will get to generate a token in the process, meaning you can just hold her on the backline and you don't even have to swing with her to make her generate you an army of tokens. Jacked Rabbit. It's a 2-mana creature with the Ravenous mechanic, meaning whenever you cast this creature, you can invest extra mana into the X, and it will enter with X +1/+1 counters. And the best part about this card is that whenever it attacks, it will generate you X 1/1 White Rabbit tokens, X being equal to its power. And this card sort of double dips on Kudo's ability and all of the Anthem effects we are playing, because an Anthem effect will both increase Jacked Rabbit's power, making it generate you more Rabbit tokens, and those Rabbit tokens that enter the battlefield will also have their power and toughness boosted by the Anthem effect, both increasing the amount of tokens you produce and the size of those tokens. A great creature to cast early in the game for just 2 mana and start boosting up with your Anthem effects, or a fantastic body later in the game to invest a huge amount of mana into, make it enter with a huge amount of counters, and it will just take over the game all by itself. And another creature we are playing with the Ravenous mechanic is Tervigon, and this card is really similar to Jacked Rabbit, because whenever Tervigon deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to create that many 1/1 green Terranet tokens. Now usually whenever you cast a spell for just a 2 base mana, it will enter as a 0/0 creature and it will just die instantly. But thanks to Kudo, this creature will actually enter as a 2/2 creature, so you will be able to cast it for the 2 mana without investing anything into the X. And whenever you are able to boost this creature's stats either by using an Anthem effect or giving it a +1/+1 counter with its Ravenous ability, it will always be able to deal combat damage thanks to the trample, because it will have more than 2 power and your opponent's creatures will only have 2 toughness, generating you a ton of tokens whenever you swing with it, which in turn will also get boosted by Kudo and your Anthem effects. Springheart Nantuko, a 2 mana enchantment creature that whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control will generate you a 1/1 insect token, already making it into a card that will generate you a consistent amount of creature tokens over the course of the game. And on top of that, this card also has the Bestow ability, meaning instead of playing it as a creature, you can also play it for 2 mana and enchant it to a creature you control. The enchanted creature will get a +1/+1 stat boost, already pushing it over that 2/2 stat line, and whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, you get the ability to pay 2 mana. When you do, you get to create a token copy of whatever creature this card is enchanted onto. Just imagine bestowing a Springheart Nantuko onto your Jacked Rabbit. Whenever you do have multiple copies of a Jacked Rabbit on the battlefield and you can start swinging with them, the amount of bunnies you will be able to generate will be absolutely insane, and you will be closing out the game really fast. Adeline, Resplendent Qatar, a classic well-known card that is used in many token decks, and that is because it has a similar effect to Inox Strike Leader. Whenever you attack with any of your creatures, you get to generate a tapped and attacking 1/1 soldier token for each opponent. So once again, 3 tokens per attack, and thanks to Kudo, their stats will be increased to a 2/2 baseline, giving you a total of 6 power and toughness entering the battlefield for just attacking, which can be improved even more if you have any of your Anthem effects on the battlefield. And Adeline also has the effect that her power will be equal to the amount of creatures you control. But sadly, due to the way of how layers work, whenever you do have Kudo on the battlefield, Adeline will always have 2 power, since Kudo will just override her effect. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, a 3 mana planeswalker that feels like she was made for exactly this type of deck. Her +1 ability will generate you a 0/1 plant token, which already acts as a really solid blocker to protect your Nissa with, and is a way to get an additional creature token onto the battlefield to start boosting with your Anthem effects. Her -2 ability will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, acting as a board-wide buff and boosting your creature creatures far beyond the 2/2 base stat line, allowing us to win any trade we make in the game. And whenever we are able to get to her ultimate ability, we get to gain X life and draw X cards, X being the amount of lands we control. So if you are able to protect this card and it does stay onto the battlefield, she will reward you with a huge amount of card draw and you will just take over the game that way. A really solid value engine that acts as a token generator, a way to buff your entire board, and a game-ending threat if your opponents aren't able to deal with it. Dorks, Fist of the Angels, a 3-mana creature that will generate you a 1/1 green and white human token with the training mechanic whenever you cast a creature spell. And since we are playing a creature heavy list with a really low curve, we will always be casting ton of creatures every turn, which tokens then will translate into an overwhelming board state. And due to us playing a lot of cards with the convoke mechanic, the tokens being both white and green actually matters a lot, and it really helps us pay for the mana cost of any of our convoke spells. Now the training mechanic is a cute little addition, but it is actually a really hard thing to abuse with Kudo on the field, because every creature will have the same amount of stats and training will only trigger whenever that creature attacks together with a creature with greater power. That being said, if you do have the ability to boost a single creature's power by using cards like a Dromoka's Command or a Bridgeworks Battle, you can just start stacking counters onto those creature tokens and you can get the training chain rolling, just constantly buffing your entire board. All-Tech Matter Weaver, another 3-drop creature that is really similar to Dorks, because every time we cast a creature spell we get to generate a 1/1 colorless gnome token. While its ability obviously isn't as good as Dorks, it is still a really valuable inclusion in the deck that will generate you a ton of creature tokens over the course of the game. The ability also comes with a second option that allows us to create a copy out of any artifact token we control, but sadly we don't really have a use for that in this deck. I suppose you can enchant your Springheart Nun to go onto your Metallic Mimic, play a land, create a copy out of the Mimic, and then you can start generating additional copies with All-Tech's ability. But the odds of that ever happening are like 0.0001%. Warden of the Grove, one of my personal favorite cards we got in the Dragonstorm set. For 3 mana we get a 2/2 creature that will get a +1/+1 counter at the beginning of your end step, which is a really solid way to ensure that this creature will always be above the base 2/2 stat line with Kudo. But the best part about this card is that whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, it will endure X. X being the amount of counters on this creature. And the endure mechanic basically gives you a choice between two options. You can either choose to put X +1/+1 counters on the creature that just entered, boosting it way above the base 2/2 stat line, or you can choose to generate an XX Spirit token. No matter how big the Spirit token is whenever it enters, it will always have a base power and toughness of 2 thanks to Kudo. But that being said, this card just gives you a ton of versatility. You can either use it to just buff up your creatures with counters, or you can utilize it as a really solid token generator. Whatever you need at the current board state, this card will provide you with some insane value. Felidar Retreat, a 4-mana enchantment that will trigger its ability whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control. You either get to generate a 2/2 Cat Beast token, or you get to put a +1/+1 counter on every creature you control and they will gain vigilance until the end of the turn. And just like the previous card, this enchantment can be either a token generator or a token buffer, depending on whatever you need most at the current board state. And even though this enchantment might seem really simple, I can guarantee you if it does stay on the board for a couple of turns and your opponents have no way to deal with it, it will take over the game all by itself. Silk, Web Weaver, a 4-mana creature with the web slinging mechanic, meaning instead of casting this for 4 mana, you can also pay 3 mana and return a tapped creature you control to your hand. Now we won't be using the web slinging mechanic this often in the deck, but if you are a little tight on mana, you can just return a tapped token to your hand to get a 1 mana discount on this card. And just like Dorks, whenever you cast any creature spell, Silk will generate you a 1/1 green and white token. And that token generating ability alone would already be more than enough reason to include Silk in the deck. But on top of that, she also has an activated ability for 5 mana, which will give all creatures you control a +2/+2 stat boost and vigilance until the end of turn, allowing you to give a huge stat boost to the massive board of tokens we control, push your your stats even further above the 2/2 baseline, and thanks to the vigilance you can just swing and you will still have blockers left. And all of these abilities combined make Silk into one of the most underrated cards in the entire Spooderman set. Maya, Bretagard Protector, a 5 mana creature that is essentially an Anthem effect on a stick, because for as long as she is on the battlefield, all other creatures you control will get a +1/+1 stat boost. And just having this creature on the battlefield combined with Kudo will make sure that your creatures will always win any trade they make in combat. And on top of that, she is also a token generator with a similar ability to Springheart Nantuko. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, you get to generate a 1/1 warrior token, which instantly will be turned into a 2/2 creature thanks to Kudo, and then thanks to Maya's ability it will get a +1/+1 stat boost and it will be a 3/3 creature token. Tendershoot Dryad, one of the most expensive creatures in this entire deck, but for good reason. Because at the beginning of each upkeep it will generate you a 1/1 sap rolling token, which means that per turn cycle you will get to generate 4 creature tokens. Already in itself some really solid value. And whenever you do control the City's Blessing, meaning you need to control 10 or more permanents, all of those sap rolling tokens will also get a +2/+2 stat boost. And these sap rollings can get out of control really quickly, because their 1/1 bodies will be increased to a 2/2 base stat line thanks to Kudo, and then you will get the +2/+2 effect from the Tendershoot Dryad on top of that, turning them into 4/4 creature tokens. And yeah, you will get 4 of those every turn cycle, giving you a total of 16 power and toughness entering the battlefield. And that's not even taking into account all of the other Anthem effects we are playing in this deck. And the last card in this section is Champions from Beyond. Before making this video, I didn't even know this card existed. For 2 white mana plus X, you will get an enchantment that whenever it enters the battlefield will generate you X 1/1 colorless hero tokens. So later in the game, if you do have a ton of mana to spare, you can just invest it in this card and generate you an army of tokens that you can start buffing up. This enchantment will then stay on the battlefield and it does have 2 really good effects. Whenever you attack with 4 or more creatures, you get to scry 2 and then you get to draw a card. And due to us being a token deck, swinging with 4 creatures isn't all that hard to do, which this enchantment will then reward you for with some free top deck manipulation and free card draw. And whenever you swing with 8 creatures and this enchantment on the battlefield, all of those attacking creatures will get a massive +4/+4 stat boost, which as you can imagine later in the game, if you are swinging with that many creatures, will give such a huge stat boost that you will be able to take an opponent out of the game with it. And the cool thing about this card is that you can just cast it for 2 mana, X being 0, you won't get to generate any tokens, but you will still get its passive effects. Next up, we have the Anthems and the stat boosts. And this is where Kudo stops being fair. Since every creature will be locked in at a 2/2 baseline, every stat boost across our board will immediately put us ahead. These cards don't just make our board bigger, they make combat completely one-sided in our favor. And let's start by talking about the weirdest Anthem effect in the entire deck. Spider-Ham, Peter Porker. It's a 2 mana spider boar hero that whenever it enters a battlefield will generate you a food token. And he has a passive ability that will give a +1/+1 stat boost to a huge list of random creature types. Spiders, boars, birds, lizard, mice, otters, and many more. But the most important part, and not many people know this, is that it will also give a +1/+1 stat boost to bears. And even though this is a really weird card, it is one of the best new additions to any sort of Kudo deck, because you're getting an Anthem effect attached to a creature body for just 2 mana, which is some absolutely ridiculous value. Rally the Ranks, a 2 mana enchantment that whenever it enters the battlefield will make you choose a creature type. Obviously we will be naming bears, and then all creatures you control of the chosen type will get +1/+1. Now thanks to Kudo turning all of our creatures into bears, this is a 2 mana Anthem effect. The sort of normal price you pay for any sort of +1/+1 stat boost across your board is 3 mana, making making this into a really efficient card. Lumen class frigate, a 2-mana spacecraft with the station mechanic, meaning whenever this card is on the battlefield, you are allowed to tap any creature you control and you get to add charge counters onto this card equal to that creature's power. And the best part about stationing is the fact that it doesn't care about summoning sickness. So you can just play your 2/2 creature, and even though you can't attack with it yet, you can just tap it to station this card. And whenever it does get to 2 charge counters, it will act as a global Anthem effect, giving all creatures you control a +1/+1 stat boost. And as the game goes on, there will always be turns where you have untapped creatures available. You can then just use them to station this card, and whenever you get to the 12 charge counter threshold, this card will be a flying lifelink creature. Now the main reason why it's included is the Anthem effect, but getting an additional flying lifelink body later in the game you can actually start buffing up and swinging with is a nice little added benefit. Metallic Mimic, a 2-mana artifact creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows you to choose a creature type. And each creature we control that enters the battlefield of the chosen type will enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, which obviously is just any creature we control because Kudo will turn all of them into bears. So another sort of pseudo Anthem effect we get attached to a 2-mana creature body. Anthem of Champions. Yeah, nothing fancy here, just a really efficient unconditional Anthem effect. 2 mana, all creatures you control will get +1/+1. And a cool thing is that this card doesn't care if you control Kudo or not, because you don't need your creatures to be bears to actually get the stat boost. Flowering of the White Tree. Usually whenever you mention Anthem effects to people, this is the first card that pops in their heads. And that is because the value and efficiency on this card is just crazy. Like I mentioned, the baseline for these type of effects is paying 3 mana for a simple +1/+1 stat boost. But this card pushes that totally over the top. It will give all non-legendary creatures you control +1/+1 and all legendary creatures you control +2/1 and ward 1. So already giving you 1 additional power on your legendaries, and the ward 1 is actually a really relevant keyword. Because now whenever your opponents are trying to target your Kudo or any of your other legendary value engines, they will have to pay 1 additional generic mana, making it really annoying to deal with whatever you're doing. Adaptive Automaton, another artifact creature that will allow you to choose a creature type when it enters the battlefield, and all creatures you control of the chosen type will get a +1/+1 stat boost. A really solid Anthem effect attached to a creature body, and the fact that we only have to pay colorless mana for this card is actually really nice, since we do use a budget mana base and we won't always have access to all of our colors. King Darien the 48. For 3 mana you get a creature that will give all other creatures you control a +1/+1 stat boost. So another Anthem effect attached to a creature body. By paying 5 mana you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto this card and you get to generate a 1/1 soldier token. So later in the game, whenever you do have a ton of lands available or you are able to generate a huge amount of mana by using Cryptolith Rite, you can just start activating this ability to grow King Darien and to generate you a huge amount of creature tokens, which will already receive the benefit of King Darien's first effect. But on top of that, you can also sacrifice this creature to give all creature tokens you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn, which is just the perfect tool to protect your entire board from being wiped. So in one creature you get an Anthem effect, a body that will grow itself by using counters, a token generator, and a protection spell for any sort of token you control. Not too shabby for just a 3 mana creature, right? Beastmaster Ascension. By far the biggest Anthem effect in the entire deck. Whenever you have this 3 mana enchantment on the battlefield and you attack with a creature, you get to put a quest counter on it. And once this card has 7 or more quest counters on it, it will give all of your creatures a massive +5/+5 passive stat boost, which obviously is just an incredibly huge number. And due to us being a token deck and always being ahead in stats thanks to Kudo, we will always be swinging with our creatures and we will be able to get to the 7 quest counters really quickly. Patchwork Banner, a 3 mana artifact that functions as a mana rock because you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And it also comes attached with a +1/+1 Anthem effect for any creature you control of a chosen type. And paying just 3 colorless mana for a card that's both an Anthem effect and a mana rock is some really efficient value. Sandstorm Salvager, another card I didn't even know existed before creating this deck. It's a 3 mana 1/1 creature that will enter the battlefield with a colorless artifact token. Getting 2 creature bodies entering the battlefield for just 3 mana is already a pretty good deal in this deck. But where this card absolutely shines is its activated ability. For 2 mana and tapping this creature, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature token we control. And all of those tokens will also get trample until the end of turn, giving us a perfect way to keep buffing our tokens over that 2/2 baseline. And later in the game, if you do control some huge creature tokens thanks to the counter stacking or Anthem effects, you can just use this card to give all of those tokens trample, and you will be able to deal a huge amount of damage to your opponents. Especially because their creatures will only have 2 toughness whenever you have Kudo on the battlefield, and the trample damage really does add up. Skyhunter Strike Force, a 3 mana flying creature with the melee mechanic, meaning that whenever this creature attacks, it will get a +1/+1 stat boost for each opponent that you are attacking. So if you're just swinging with one of your tokens at all 3 of your opponents, the melee mechanic will result in a +3/+3 stat boost. And the best part about this card is the Lieutenant ability, meaning whenever you control your commander, all creatures you control will also get the melee mechanic. So now you can just attack all of your opponents and all creatures you control will get a +3/+3 stat boost, which is just some absolutely insane value. Your creatures will essentially get some sort of an overrun effect whenever you have this card on the battlefield. And the fact that you get this kind of huge buff attached to a flying body makes it into a really efficient card. Wild Beastmaster, a 3 mana creature that whenever it attacks will give all other attacking creatures you control a +X/+X stat boost. X being Wild Beastmaster's power. Now normally this card only has 1 power and it will only give a slight stat boost to your board whenever you attack with it. But whenever you do have Kudo on the battlefield, she will already go to a 2/2 base stat line. Whenever you then are able to get some Anthem effects into play, you can boost its power even further and make her give an even bigger buff to your entire board whenever you swing with her. And usually whenever you have a huge amount of tokens on the battlefield, just attacking with a Wild Beastmaster and getting the buff onto like 10 creatures will just take an opponent out of the game. The only downside to this ability is the fact that this creature doesn't boost her own stats. So her body will be smaller in comparison to your tokens, and if your opponents are able to like double or triple block her, you will actually lose her in combat. Just make sure you do have enough Anthem effects out before you actually go for the swing with this creature. And now let's take a look at my favorite pet card in the entire deck. Diligent Zookeeper. It's a new 4 mana creature we got in the Avatar set, and its ability is really unique and something we've never seen before. Each non-human creature we control will get +1/+1 for each of its creature types, up to a maximum of 10. Now whenever this card got revealed, people immediately went wild over changelings. But since a changeling has all creature types including the human type, it doesn't actually work on them. That being said, in this type of deck you will get a huge amount of value out of this card, because thanks to Kudo, all of our creatures will have an additional type, being bear. And in this deck we already have a ton of cards that actually have dual typings. Springheart Nantuko is an insect monk, Imara is an elf cleric, Jacked Rabbit is a rabbit warrior, and Spiderham is a spider boar hero. When you do take into account that these creatures will also be a bear in addition to their other types, Diligent Zookeeper will always give a +3/+3 or a +4/+4 passive stat boost, which is pretty massive for just a 4-drop creature. Obelisk of Earth, massive 6 mana artifact that will give all creatures we control of the chosen type a +2/+2 stat boost. Now paying 6 mana for this type of effect is an absolutely horrible deal. Good thing this card has the Convoke mechanic, meaning whenever we cast it we can tap any creature we control to reduce its mana cost by 1 generic mana. And I can guarantee you we will always have a huge number of creatures on the battlefield, and usually you will be able to cast this massive Anthem effect for just 0 mana. And the last card in this section is a Thunderfoot Ballad, a massive 6 mana 5/5 trample creature with the Lieutenant mechanic, meaning whenever you do control your commander, this creature and all other creatures you control will get a +2/+2 stat boost and trample. And this is just one of the best win condition cards in the entire deck, because you will get a massive trample creature body you can actually start swinging with. It does come attached with a +2/+2 Anthem effect, and thanks to the trample you will be able to get a massive amount of damage through, especially since your opponent's creatures will only have 2 toughness whenever you do have Kudo on the battlefield. A really good game finisher for any sort of green budget deck. Next up we have the acceleration section. Even though we're playing a 2 mana commander, getting ahead early really matters. These are the cards that help us accelerate our game plan and overwhelm the board before our opponents are ready. First up, we play 3 1-mana dorks. Perfect little creature bodies that will allow us to deploy our threats one turn earlier, and obviously later in the game they will also be scaled up by Kudo and all of our Anthem effects, and we can actually start swinging with them. Soul Ring. Yeah, what should I even say about this card? It is by far the most efficient mana rock ever printed. And even though our commander doesn't have any generic mana in its mana cost, whenever he does get removed, a Soul Ring will help you pay for its commander tax. And obviously it will just allow you to play your bigger cards way earlier in the game than you actually should. Cryptolith Rite. It's a simple 2-mana enchantment that will give all creatures you control an additional ability. And that is that you can tap them to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, essentially turning all creatures you control into birds of paradise. And Cryptolith Rite is just an insane card in any sort of creature token based deck. Due to the sheer amount of creatures you'll be controlling, you will be able to produce an insane amount of mana every turn, which you can use to cast any of your really expensive spells, pay for expensive abilities like King Darien, or to get multiple uses out of your Gavany Township. A really good card to either accelerate you early in the game or later in the game whenever you control like 7 gazillion tokens. You can just use the mana they produce to take over the game that way. Song of Realize. A 2-mana saga that whenever it gets to its first stage and second stage will essentially give you a Cryptolith Rites-like effect. Just keep in mind, a saga ability will actually trigger after your draw step. It will then give the mana ability to all creatures you control at that point, but if you do decide to play additional creatures afterwards on that turn, this effect won't apply to them. And whenever this saga gets to its third part, you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on all creatures you control. And they will also get Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until the end of turn. So a really good card to drop early in the game and just accelerate your mana like crazy to get you ahead. And later in the game, it will buff up all your creatures and give them Trample, so it actually acts as some sort of a win condition. Enduring Vitality. A 3-mana enchantment creature that has exactly the same ability as a Cryptolith Rite. Now it does cost 1 mana more, but in return you get a creature body you can actually swing with, and whenever this creature would be removed from the battlefield, it just returns as an enchantment, so you won't lose its effect, functioning as a Cryptolith Rite on a stick that has to be dealt with twice. Next up we have the card draw section. While Selesnya colors are really good at building you a board, drawing cards is one of its biggest weaknesses. This section covers the engines that will reward us with card draw for going wide, attacking with our creatures, and creating tokens, making sure we never run out of gas. Idol of Oblivion. A very well-known 2-mana artifact that many token decks run. And that is because it is a really simple card that allows us to tap it to draw a card, but we can only use this ability if we created a token this turn. As you've already seen, this is a really easy requirement to meet in this deck, basically ensuring us that we will get to draw 1 additional card every turn. Rite of Harmony. A 2-mana instant speed spell that will allow us to draw a card whenever a creature enters this turn. And this card is absolutely insane whenever you combine it with any card that generates multiple tokens. Whenever you attack with your Adeline, you will get to draw 3 cards. Attack with a 5-power Jacked Rabbit and you will get to draw 5 cards. And whenever you cast a creature spell with a tokens on the battlefield, you will get a card of the creature entering, and you will get to draw a card of the token that tokens creates you. And on top of that, this card also has the flashback mechanic for 4 mana, making this into one of the best card draw spells in the entire deck, and you can even get 2 uses out of it. Staff of the Storyteller, a card that is really similar to Idol of Oblivion. For 2 mana, you get an artifact that whenever it enters a battlefield will generate you a 1/1 Flying Spirit token, already giving you a creature body whenever it enters, and whenever 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, you get to put a counter on this artifact. And then by paying 1 white mana, tapping this card and removing a counter, you get to draw a card. Now with the amount of tokens we will be creating, you will always have counters available on this card to convert into card draw. And drawing a card for just 1 mana is a really good deal. Elemental Bond. A 3-mana enchantment that will allow you to draw a card whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield. Now I know, this might seem really weird in a Kudo deck, because Kudo will make all creatures have 2 power, but we'll only need 1 Anthem effect on the battlefield, and every creature in this deck will actually have 3 power. And the best thing about this enchantment is that it even triggers off tokens entering the battlefield. So let's say you have Kudo and 1 Anthem effect on the battlefield, and then you attack with your Jacked Rabbit. 3 power rabbit tokens will then enter the battlefield, and you will get to draw 3 cards of that. Good seal. Malamet Exemplar. passively your opponents won't be able to cast any spell during your turn, which is a really similar effect to Grand Abolisher, and during your turn you won't ever have to worry about being interacted with. And whenever one or more creatures you control would deal damage to an opponent and their power is higher than their base power, you get to draw a card. And all it takes to meet this requirement is just having one Anthem effect on the battlefield. Just be warned, due to the way of how this card is worded, even if you connect with 5 creatures on one single opponent, you will only get to draw one card, because it states one or more creatures. So the best thing to do with Kudo is send one of your creatures at each one of your opponents, and whenever all 3 creatures connect, you will actually get to draw 3 cards. Legolas Greenleaf, a 3-mana creature that can be blocked by any creature with power 2 or less, which means whenever you do have Kudo on the battlefield, Legolas will essentially be unblockable because all of your opponent's creatures will only have 2 power. And whenever Legolas deals combat damage to a player, he will draw you a card. Now, assuming you will be swinging with him every single turn because he can be blocked anyways, this means 1 extra card draw per turn. And on top of that, whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Legolas, making him into an unblockable body that will grow itself over the course of the game. Rumor Gatherer, a 3-mana creature that will allow you to scry 1 whenever another creature enters the battlefield. And scrying is actually a really solid mechanic in a Selesnya deck, because it allows you to manipulate the top cards of your library, and if you for example see that you have a land on top but you want to have an actual useful card to draw, you can just scry to the bottom and you will increase the chances of you drawing something useful. And whenever this ability triggers for the second time in a turn, which as you can imagine isn't all that hard to do in this deck, it will even draw you a card. Another really solid card draw engine attached to a creature body. Tokasia's Welcome, a 3-mana enchantment that will allow you to draw a card whenever you play a creature with mana value 3 or less. Sadly, this ability will only trigger once per turn. Now, there are way better card draw engines attached to creature bodies like a Welcoming Vampire or an Enduring Innocence, but these cards will trigger depending on the creature having a low power. And I decided to exclude these cards because whenever we do have some Anthem effects on the battlefield, these cards won't actually trigger anymore. The fact that Tokasia's Welcome only cares about the mana cost of the creature that entered is actually way more relevant. Beast Whisperer, a classic 4-mana creature that will draw you a card whenever you cast a creature spell. And since we are a creature heavy list that plays a total of 35 creatures, you will always be able to generate a huge amount of value with this card. Benny Brax, a 4-mana creature that at the beginning of each end step will check if you did create a token this turn. If you did, you get to draw a card. And the reason why Benny is included in this deck is due to him having the Convoke mechanic. So you can just use any tokens on the battlefield that you're not planning to swing with to pay for Benny's mana cost, and you will essentially be able to cast a card draw engine on a creature body for just 0 mana invested. And the last card in this section is everyone's favorite little squirrel with a huge amount of abilities. Toski, Bearer of Secrets. For 4 mana you get a 1/1 body that can be countered, has indestructible, has to attack every combat if able, and the best part is whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. And unlike Kudo, the card draw on this creature isn't limited. If you do manage to connect with 10 creatures to one of your opponents, you will actually get to draw 10 cards. So a really insane card draw engine that your opponents can barely ever deal with due to it having indestructible. If you're enjoying these in-depth deck videos and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. Members will get early access to the decklists of these videos, access to some exclusive chat rooms in the Panzer MTG Discord, where I'm always sharing behind the scenes sneak peeks of what I'm currently working on, and of course a very nice Panzer helmet next to your name on YouTube. And more importantly, your support is what actually enables me to keep pumping out these really in-depth weekly deck decks. So a massive thanks to everyone who is already a YouTube member. It really does mean more than you can imagine. And speaking of the community, if you're not in the Panzer MTG Discord yet, you're seriously missing out. We really have everything there. We are helping each other build our decks, discussing newly spoiled cards. My favorite part is that people are genuinely sharing some top tier memes. So whether you're a YouTube member, you're in the Discord, or you're just using these videos to fall asleep to my voice, thank you for being a part of this. Alright, now let's get back to the bears. Next up we have the support cards. These are some utility effects and synergy cards that don't directly buff our board or create us tokens, but they do dramatically improve this deck's consistency and overall game plan. And while Kudo is the king among bears, we're obviously also playing the queen, Ayula. And this is probably one of the strongest tribal lords ever printed. Whenever another bear enters the battlefield under your control, you get to choose one out of two fantastic options. You either get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target bear, which is just a fantastic way to buff the stats of any of your creatures over the top, especially when combined with Kudo, or the second option allows you to target one of the bears you control and make it fight a creature you don't control. And since all of your creatures will be bears thanks to Kudo, it is a really oppressive removal effect. You just need one Anthem effect on the board and your bears will always come out on top in a fight, allowing you to just pinpoint remove any creature on the battlefield and you won't even lose anything in the process. If you do decide to play a Kudo deck, you should always include Ayula. The synergy between these two cards is just absolutely ridiculous. Lightning Greaves, a classic 2-mana equipment you can equip for 0 mana and it will give the equipped creature both haste and shroud. A really solid way to make sure your Kudo or any of your other value creatures can't ever be interacted with, and it's also a really good haste enabler to just equip to any of your attack trigger or combat damage reliant creatures to just make sure you can instantly swing with them. Like for example your Jacked Rabbit or your Wild Beastmaster. Champion of Lambhold. If you didn't know this card yet, I am about to blow your mind. For 3 mana you get a 1/1 creature that will get a +1/+1 counter whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control. So already you're getting a creature body that will just grow itself over the course of the game and it will trigger out of any creatures you play or any tokens you create. But the absolutely broken part about this card is the first ability. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lambhold aren't able to block any creature you control. And yeah, that's right, any creature you control, not just Champion of Lambhold. And essentially what this creature does with just 1 point of power boosting and Kudo on the battlefield is making your entire board unblockable. Because your Champion of Lambhold will be at 3 power, and thanks to Kudo, all your opponent's creatures will only have 2 power, making your entire board unblockable. Champion of Lambhold is one of the best win conditions in the entire deck, and you can really catch your opponents off guard with this card. Wedding Announcement, a 3-mana enchantment that at the beginning of your end step will get an invitation counter. Then it will check if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. If you did, you get to draw a card. And if you didn't, you get to create a 1/1 creature token. So it acts as either a card draw engine or a token generator. And honestly, both of those options are completely fine. You'll always be happy to be generating additional tokens or drawing additional cards. And once this card gets to 3 invitation counters, it transforms into its backside, which is just an additional +1/+1 Anthem effect. And the more of these Anthem effects you can stack, the faster you will be able to just win the game. Brigitte, Hero of Kinsbale, a 4-mana creature that you can tap to deal 2 damage to each attacking or blocking creature that target opponent controls. And this effect is absolutely brutal when combined with Kudo, because now whenever your opponents do decide to attack you, you can just tap this card and all of their attackers will be destroyed. And if you do decide to swing your huge army of creatures at one of your opponents and they just have to block them or they will lose the game otherwise, you can just tap this card and all of their blockers will be destroyed before ever even dealing damage. A really oppressive and really annoying card to deal with for your opponents. And now that we're on the topic of really oppressive and annoying cards, Reverence, a 4-mana enchantment that won't allow creatures with power 2 or less to attack you. And once again, whenever you do have Kudo on the battlefield, your opponents won't ever be able to attack you anymore. So for as long as your opponents have no answer to this enchantment or Kudo, they won't ever be able to win the game on combat damage versus you. Glorious Sunrise, a 5-mana enchantment that will allow you to pick 1 out of 4 options at the beginning of every one of your combat steps. The first option will give all creatures you control a +1/+1 stat boost and trample, which is a fantastic sort of mini overrun effect to just give an additional Anthem effect to your creatures and will ensure you can get combat damage through thanks to the trample. The second option allows you to give a land you control the ability to tap for 3 green mana, which is a perfect tool to use whenever you have a big card in your hand and you desperately need the mana to pay for it. The third option allows you to draw a card if you control a creature with power 3 or greater, which is a requirement that's obviously really easy to meet because you just need Kudo and 1 Anthem effect. And the last option gives you some life gain. Now obviously all of the options on this card are absolutely fantastic, but the best part is that you can just choose whatever option you need at the current given board state. Card draw, mana acceleration, or a game finisher. Next up we have the interaction and protection section. Once you have a couple of Anthem effects, Kudo, and a huge army of tokens on the board, you will become the biggest threat at the table. These are the cards that will protect any of our value creatures, they will protect our board from being wiped, and they will allow us to interact with any problematic cards that our opponents might control. Requisition Rate, a 1 mana card with the spree mechanic, which means whenever we cast this card we are allowed to pay any additional cost and we get that bonus effect. The first option allows us to put a +1/+1 counter on all of our creatures, which is just a perfect global buff effect to push our creatures over the top whenever everything is equalized by Kudo. And the last two options allow us to destroy either target enchantment or artifact. Perfect way to deal with any problematic cards that your opponents might control. A Phyrexian Altar, Heuristic Studies, a Ghostly Prison, whatever. And the best part about this card is that you can just cast it for 2 mana and pick one of the options, or you can also cast it for 4 mana and just get all of the effects of this card. Swords to Plowshares. Yeah, obviously it is included. 1 mana, on instant speed, you get to exile any creature on the battlefield. One of the best and most efficient removal spells ever printed. Aura Mutation, a 2 mana instant speed spell that allows us to destroy any enchantment on the battlefield, giving us an additional option to deal with any problematic enchantment our opponents might control. And on top of that, we also get to create X/1/1 sap-rolling tokens, X being equal to the mana cost of the destroyed enchantment. So both an interaction spell and a card that can potentially generate us a huge amount of creature tokens. Dromoka's Command, another card I didn't even know before making this deck, and that's absolutely wild because this card is really solid. Whenever we cast this, we get to choose 2 out of 4 options. We get to prevent all damage target sorcery or instant speed spell would deal, a perfect way to deal with any sort of damage based board wipe like a Pyroclasm or a Blasphemous Act. We can make target player sacrifice an enchantment. We get the option to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control, which is a really nice way to surprise your opponents on instant speed when everything is a 2/2 body thanks to Kudo. And the last option allows us to fight a creature we don't control, which is an excellent removal piece, especially when you have an Anthem effect and Kudo on the battlefield, because you won't ever lose a fight. Now honestly, all 4 of the options on this card are fantastic, and the fact that you get to choose 2 of those options whenever you cast this card really makes this into one of the most versatile Selesnya cards I've ever seen. Duty Beyond Death. Whenever you cast a spell, you will have to sacrifice a creature as an additional cost. Then whenever it resolves, all of your creatures will gain indestructible until the end of turn, and you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on each one of your creatures. A really solid spell to prevent your board from being wiped and even giving your creatures a buff whenever you do it. Now obviously there are way better protection spells for 2 mana that don't actually force us to sacrifice a creature, but this is just the perfect card for the budget version of this deck. Grand Crescendo. For 2 white mana plus X, we get to generate X/1/1 green and white creature tokens and then give all creatures we control indestructible until the end of turn. You can use it as a protection spell, just cast it for 2 white mana. You won't be generating any tokens in the process, but you will still get the indestructibility effect. Or later in the game, whenever you do have a ton of lands available or a card like Cryptolith Rites on the battlefield, you can just pump a huge amount of mana into this spell and just generate you a gazillion tokens. Bridgeworks Battle. For 3 mana, you get to give a +2/+2 stat boost to any of your creatures, and then it will fight another creature. Thanks to everything being equalized to Kudo, you will always win in a fight, making this into a spot removal spell. And the best part is that this card is an MDFC land. So if you don't need a removal effect, you can just play the backside of this card, which is a land that taps for a green mana and even enters the battlefield untapped for the low cost of 3 life. Unbreakable Formation. For 3 mana, you get to give all creatures you control indestructible until the end of turn. A perfect answer to any sort of board wipe. And this card also has the addendum mechanic, meaning whenever you cast it during any of your main phases, all creatures you control will get a +1/+1 counter, and they will get vigilance until the end of turn. So you can either use this as a protection spell, or you can just use it to buff up your entire board, give it vigilance, and your creatures won't even get tapped for swinging with them. Will of the Mardu. For 3 mana on instant speed, you get to pick one out of 2 options. The first option will generate you a 1/1 red warrior token for each creature that target player controls. Now most of the time we will be controlling the most creatures and we will just target ourselves with this effect, just doubling up on the amount of creatures we have on the board. And thanks to Kudo, the value on this card is pretty incredible because all of those tokens will actually be 2/2 bodies instead. The second option will deal damage to target creature equal to the amount of creatures we control. Yeah, obviously we will always be controlling a huge amount of creatures, turning this into a really efficient spot removal spell. Now while both effects on this card are really fantastic, the best part is that whenever you control your commander, when you cast this, you actually get to activate both effects. So first it will just double the amount of creatures you have, and then it will allow you to destroy any creature on the battlefield. And the last card in this section is Solar Tide, a massive 6 mana spell with 2 options. But the only option we care about is the first one. It will destroy all creatures with power 2 or less. The only thing you need is a Kudo on the battlefield, 1 Anthem effect boosting your creatures to 3 power, and whenever you then cast a spell, it will be a one-sided board wipe, just destroying all creatures your opponents control, and you won't lose anything in the process. Next up, we have the lands. Now since this deck is built on a €100 budget, the mana base isn't anything fancy. That being said, we do run a couple of really important utility lands, so I'll start by going over those. Abandoned Air Temple, a new land we got in the Avatar set. For 4 mana and tapping this land, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. And truth be told, this is just the power-crapped version of a Gavany Township, since it's really easy to make this land enter untapped, and it even produces you a white mana instead of a colorless. And later in the game, you can just start dumping all of your mana into this land, just buff up your board and make the power imbalance even bigger. Castle Ardenvale, another land that enters the battlefield untapped if you control a plains, and for 4 mana and tapping it, you get to generate a 1/1 token. There's no real downsides to including this land into your deck, and it is just a nice additional token generator you can use later in the game. Diamond City, a land that will enter the battlefield with a shield counter. And a shield counter basically means whenever this permanent would be dealt damage or be destroyed, you get to just remove the shield counter instead and prevent the destruction or the damage. By tapping this land, whenever 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under our control this turn, we get to move the shield counter onto another creature we control. Just a nice little land to prevent your Kudo or any other value creature from actually being destroyed. Gavany Township, a card with exactly the same effect as the Abandoned Air Temple. A nice way to convert your mana into board-wide buffs later in the game, and even though it is strictly worse than the Air Temple, it is still a really good inclusion in the deck. Minas Tirith, a legendary land that will enter untapped whenever you control a legendary creature, which due to us having a 2 mana commander will always be the case. For 2 mana and tapping this land, you get to draw a card, but you can only activate it if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. A really solid land that doubles up as a card draw engine with a really easy requirement to meet for any sort of token deck. Restless Prairie, the Selesnya Manland. For 4 mana, you can animate this land into a 3/3 creature. And whenever you then attack with this creature, all creatures you control will get a +1/+1 stat boost until the end of turn, which is obviously just fantastic in any sort of deck that plans on controlling a huge amount of tokens, and it will give us an additional Anthem effect. And for the regular mana producing lands in this deck, we're playing a Brushland, a Canopy Vista, a Command Tower, a Fortified Village, a Horizon Canopy, an Overgrown Farmland, a Razorvenge Ticket, a Sungrass Prairie, a Sun Petal Grove, and for basics we're playing 10 forests and 8 plains. And finally, we have the upgrade section. If you want to push this deck to its limits and you don't care about a €100 budget, these are the cards I'd include. At the end of the upgrade section, I will also flash into the screen screen what cards you should actually swap out to include these upgrades. 3/3 City. Whenever this land enters the battlefield, you have to choose a creature type. And once again, we will be naming Bear. Then for 2 mana and tapping this land, we will get to add 1 mana of a specific color to our mana pool equal to the amount of creatures we control of the chosen type. And obviously, due to all of our creatures being bears thanks to Kudo, this land will always generate you an insane amount of mana. Ocelot Pride, a 1 mana creature with first strike and lifelink. At the beginning of our end step, if we gained life this turn, we get to generate a 1/1 cat token. And thanks to this card having lifelink, it will trigger its own ability and act as a really solid token generator. Now honestly, that in itself would already be enough for me to include this card in the deck. But this card also has the Ascent mechanic, meaning it does have an additional benefit whenever we control 10 or more permanents. When we do, instead of just generating us a cute 1/1 cat token, we get to create a token copy out of any token that entered the battlefield under our control this turn, which honestly is just some ridiculous value when you combine it with any of the other token generators in this deck. Esper Sentinel, everyone's favorite white 1-drop. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell in a turn, they have to pay X mana. X being Esper Sentinel's power. If they don't, you will get to draw a card. An Esper Sentinel being at just 1 power is already a really efficient card. But thanks to Kudo and all of the Anthem effects we are playing, your opponents will have to pay a huge amount of mana to prevent us from drawing cards. Charismatic Conqueror. Whenever a creature or artifact enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, they get a decision. Either they make it enter tapped, or we get to generate a 1/1 vampire token with lifelink. No matter what option your opponents choose, this card will always provide you with some incredible value. Or it will cripple your opponents by making everything enter tapped, just slowing them down and making sure they don't have any blockers. Or this simple 2-drop creature will just generate you an army of lifelink tokens. No matter what your opponents choose, it will always be a lose-lose situation for them. Voice of Victory. This card has exactly the same effect as Kutzil. Opponents can cast any spells during your turn, which is actually quite a relevant effect if you play in a really control-heavy pot. And this card also has the Mobilize 2 mechanic, meaning whenever it attacks, you get to generate 2 tapped and attacking 1/1 warrior tokens, and these tokens will be exiled at the end of combat. Now, Mobilize is just an insane mechanic whenever you combine it with Kudo or any sort of Anthem effect, because the tokens will already have a 2/2 base stat line, and it will just be boosted further over the top depending on how many Anthem effects you do control. A really solid value for just a 2-drop creature. Cosmogrand Zenith. For 3 mana, you get a creature that will trigger its ability whenever you cast your second spell on any given turn. The first option will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, a really solid effect to just boost the stats of all of your creatures even further. And the second option will allow you to generate 2 1/1 soldier tokens. So for the low cost of 3 mana, you get a card that is a fantastic token generator or board buffer. I really wanted to include this card in the main list of the deck, but sadly I couldn't make it work on the budget. Flawless Maneuver. For 3 mana, we get a spell that will give all creatures we control indestructible until the end of turn. But what makes this card absolutely broken is that whenever we control our commander, we can cast a spell for free, meaning you can just tap out all of your mana, do your thing, and still have an answer ready against board wipes. Court of Calling. For 3 green mana plus X, you get to search your library for any creature with mana value X or less and put it straight onto the battlefield. And this card also has the Convoke mechanic, meaning we can do some absolutely nasty things in this deck due to us always controlling a huge amount of tokens. If you need some interaction, you can use it to go fetch up your Ayula. If you need an Anthem effect, you can use it to go fetch up your Diligent Zookeeper. You can go fetch up your Silk as a token producer, or you can even use it to go fetch up your Thunderfoot Ballad to just close out the game. It's not an expensive card by any means, and it's excluded because I just decided to not play any tutors. Tribute to the World Tree. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, it will check if its power is 3 or greater. If it is, we get to draw a card, and if it isn't, we get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So early in the game you will just get free buffs, and later in the game, whenever you do have some Anthem effects on the battlefield, battlefield, it is one of the best card draw engines, especially since it will also trigger off 3 power tokens entering the battlefield under our control. Now in the budget version, the 3 green mana pips is actually a really hard thing to do on turn 3, but if you're not on a budget, you can include things like shock lands, fetch lands, and your color fixing will be way more consistent. Clever concealment. For 4 mana, you get to phase out any number of non-land permanents you control, meaning they won't exist until your next upkeep. And phasing out is just a fantastic way to protect you from any sort of interaction. You can use this to dodge any sort of mass bounce effects like a Cyclonic Rift, and you can even use this against exile-based mass removal like a Farewell. And on top of that, just like a flawless maneuver due to this card having the Convoke mechanic, you can just tap all of your mana, do your thing, and then just use your tokens to pay for the mana cost. Uroboroid? Let's just refer to this card as Green Space Noodle. For 4 mana, you get a creature that at the beginning of combat on your turn will put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control for each point of power this creature has. Now in itself, Space Noodle is already a really solid card, and it is a threat that has to be dealt with at some point because it will just take over the game if it stays on the battlefield for too long, because it will also grow its own power and the stat boost will be getting bigger and bigger every single turn. And its power will be boosted thanks to all of our Anthem effects and to Kudo. The amount of counter output this creature will do is just absolutely ridiculous. Roaming Throne. Yeah, you probably saw this card coming in a deck where every creature shares a creature type. When it enters the battlefield, we will name bear, and whenever any triggered ability of any bear we controls would trigger, it will trigger an additional time, giving us double the value. And this works on any creature in the deck thanks to Kudo. You will get double the power boost out of your Wild Beast Master, double the card draw out of your Beast Whisperer, double the amount of tokens of your Jacked Rabbit, double the melee triggers from Skyhunter Strike Force, and it will even double the counter production of your Metallic Mimic. Just the fact that Roaming Throne works with any creature you play thanks to Kudo is an incredibly cool synergy. Elspeth Stormslayer, a 5 mana planeswalker that will passively double any amount of token you produce, which is obviously fantastic with all of the tokens we will be generating in this deck, but on top of that she also has really good abilities. Her +1 ability will generate you a 1/1 soldier token, which will be doubled thanks to her own passive ability. The 0 ability will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and it will gain flying until your next turn, giving your entire board a buff and evasion. And the -3 ability is usually really good, but Kudo kinda ruins it. It allows you to destroy any creature with power 3 or greater, but yeah, every creature our opponents control will be only at 2 power due to our depressed little bear. Banner of Kinship. Whenever this 5 mana artifact enters the battlefield, we have to choose a creature type, and it will enter the battlefield with a fellowship counter for each creature of the chosen type we control. Now usually whenever this enters, it will be with somewhere between 5 to 20 counters due to us controlling a huge amount of bears, and then passively this card will give a +1/+1 stat boost to all bears we control, equal to the amount of fellowship counters this card has on it, which as you can imagine is just a ridiculous stat boost that will allow you to just close out the game on the spot. And the card that everyone has been waiting for because it has just an insane synergy with Kudo, Elesh Norn, Grand Cenobite. It's a 7 mana Vigilance Body that will give all creatures your opponents control -2/-2 and all creatures we control +2/+2. Whenever you do control Kudo and Elesh Norn, the game is in some sort of a soft lock, because the stats of all of your opponent's creatures will be reduced to a 2/2 baseline, and thanks to Elesh they will then get -2/-2 and they will just instantly be removed from the game. And even whenever your opponents are playing any new creatures, they will just die instantly and they can't do anything anymore until they are able to deal with either Kudo or Elesh. I really wanted to include this card in the main deck due to its insane synergy, but sadly I just couldn't fit it in the budget. And the last card in this section is a Crater Hoof Behemoth. It is a massive 5/5 haste creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will give all creatures you control a +X stat boost and trample, X being the amount of creatures we control. And as you can imagine, in this type of token based deck the stat boost will always be double digits. Combine that with trample and your opponent's creatures only having 2 toughness thanks to Kudo, and it will just always win you the game whenever you resolve this. If you want to see what cards to swap out of the deck to include any of these upgrades, I will flash it into the screen right now, so pause the video if you want to see it. And that's it for my in-depth take on a €100 budget Kudo King Among Bears deck. A deceptively simple commander that rewrites combat, flattens every creature into a 2/2 stat line, and then allows you to break parity with a ton of Anthem effects until your opponents realize they can't ever win in combat anymore. This deck is the living proof that you don't need any combos, any tutors, or that you don't have to spend a huge amount of money to build a really powerful and consistent deck. If you made it this far into the video, let me know by dropping a bear emoji in the comments below. Share this video with your entire family, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you won't miss my newest uploads. Thanks for watching, enjoy playing your new Kudo deck, and I will see you in next week's video.